The damage to self-interest and self-worth will haunt a generation.
Facebook time and time again has put profit over people.
Facebook permitted targeting of teens as young as 13 with ads that show a young woman's thin waist, promoting websites that glorify anorexia.
15% of British users and 6% of American users trace their desire to kill themselves to Instagram.
Facebook is doing studies on kids under 13, even though technically no kids under 13 are permitted on the platform.
A tip specifically designed to encourage and promote anorexia.
I think we're going to look back 20 years from now, and all of us are going to be like, what in the hell were we thinking?
I'm going to be taking a look at the congressional hearings of the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen. She said some very, very interesting things about Facebook's knowledge of how the algorithm targets children. It's pretty disturbing to hear her recount, and Facebook has now been around for a couple decades, and it is interesting how we are just now beginning to see the ramifications of heavy social media use. Eugenia could be looked at as someone who has grown up with social media. I think it's known that she has been a public figure on social media for many, many years. I believe she started in now. So just think how she was probably affected by this quite a lot while we watch what Frances Haugen has to say.
Yes or no, does Facebook have internal research indicating that Instagram harms teens, particularly harming perceptions of body image, which disproportionately affects young women?
Yes, Facebook has extensive research on the impacts of its products on teenagers, including young women. Facebook knows that its amplification algorithms, things like engagement-based ranking on Instagram, can lead children from very innocuous topics like healthy recipes to anorexia promoting content over a very short period of time. And they have done something called a proactive incident response.
She just said that Facebook knows that if you are someone who is just looking up some healthy recipes, it will begin to target you for pro-anorexia content. This is very scary stuff.
Where they take things that they've heard, for example, like, can you be led by the algorithms to anorexia content? And they have literally recreated that experiment themselves and confirmed, yes, this happens to people. So Facebook knows that they are leading young users to anorexia content.
So she just said Facebook knows that children can be led to anorexia content. And obviously, no one image or public figure can cause someone to have an eating disorder. But when these things begin to target you, it can slowly exacerbate any type of insecurity.
Do you believe that they're actually going to discontinue Instagram Kids, or are they just waiting for the dust to settle?
This is very interesting. The next platform that they're working on was Instagram Kids.
I would be sincerely surprised if they do not continue working on Instagram Kids, and I would be amazed if a year from now we don't have this conversation again.
Why?
Facebook understands that if they want to continue to grow, they have to find new users. They have to make sure that the next generation is just as engaged with Instagram as the current one. And the way they'll do that is by making sure that children establish habits before they have good self-regulation.
By hooking kids.
By hooking kids.
And in terms of hooking kids, I know that there have been studies, or it's like known that it tries to mimic gambling. Like when you scroll, you pull down to refresh, kind of like pulling the lever at a slot machine. You know, there are very smart people who work for these companies like Facebook. And these people have studied how to hook people and that is their job. Like, these are not coincidences.
The rates of problematic use by age peaked with 14-year-olds. It's just like cigarettes. Teenagers don't have good self-regulation. They want the next like. The dopamine, the little hits all the time. And I feel a lot of pain for those kids, right? Like they say they fear being ostracized if they step away from the platform. So imagine you're in this situation, you're in this relationship where every time you open the app, it makes you feel worse, but you also fear isolation if you don't.
And similar to gambling, that dopamine hit, that chemical process in your brain, nerves that wire together, fire together, the habits you build when you're a child will only strengthen as you continue them into adulthood.
The patterns that children establish in their teenage years live with them for the rest of their lives. The way they conceptualize who they are, how they conceptualize how they interact with other people, are patterns and habits that they will take with them as they become adults, as they themselves raise children. I'm very scared about the upcoming generation because when you and I interact in person and I say something mean to you and I see you wince or I see you cry, that makes me less likely to do it the next time, right? That's a feedback cycle. Online kids don't get those cues and they learn to be incredibly cruel to each other and they normalize it. And I'm scared of what will their lives look like where they grow up with the idea that it's okay to be treated badly by people who allegedly care about them. That's a scary future.
Eugenia Cooney. Yeah. Eugenia Cooney lives that reality every day. People being mean to her, harassing her under the guise of people caring about her. Who knows if Eugenia sees comments and cries or has numbed herself to it or normalized it. I mean, I've gone through some of her Twitter comments and I can't even imagine being on the receiving end.
When Facebook has made statements in the past about how much benefit Instagram is providing to kids' mental health, like kids are connecting who were once alone, what I'm so surprised about that is if Instagram is such a positive force, have we seen a golden age of teenage mental health in the last 10 years? Yeah. No, we've seen
the opposite, right?
We've seen escalating rates of suicide and depression amongst teenagers.
Do you think those rates are at least in part driven by the social media phenomenon?
There is a broad swath of research that supports the idea that usage of social media amplifies the risk for these mental health harms.
So right now, and this hearing is helping illuminate it, we are seeing...
And Facebook's own research shows that.
Right?
Yeah.
Say that again, that's important.
And Facebook's own research shows that.
Yeah, so Facebook knows. It's their research that children are being addicted to social media. If you have grown up with comparison being a teacher, that you have grown up comparing yourself to others to establish where you stand in the social hierarchy, to take that away, I mean, I can't imagine how lost you would feel if that's what you rely on to know that you're okay and doing okay.
Right, the kids are saying, I am unhappy when I use Instagram and I can't stop. That if I leave, I'm afraid I'll be ostracized. Right. Facebook's internal research is aware that there are a variety of problems facing children on Instagram. They know that severe harm is happening to children.
Severe harm is happening to children, point blank, period.
For example, in the case of bullying, Facebook knows that Instagram dramatically changes the experience of high school. Most kids have positive home lives. Like, it doesn't matter how bad it is at school. Kids can go home and reset for 16 hours. Kids who are bullied on Instagram, the bullying follows them home. It follows them into their bedrooms. The last thing they see before they go to bed at night is someone being cruel to them, or the first thing they see in the morning is someone being cruel to them. Kids are learning that their own friends, like people who they care about them, are cruel to them. Like, think about how that's going to impact their domestic relationships when they become 20-somethings or 30-somethings, to believe that people who care about you are mean to you.
Thinking about Eugenia Cooney's situation and how ruthless it is to have someone putting you down, even when you're in the comfort or around people that love you, to still feel inundated with such messages.
Facebook knows that parents today, because they didn't experience these things, they never experienced this addictive experience with a piece of technology, they give their children bad advice. They say things like, why don't you just stop using it? And so that Facebook's own research is aware that children express feelings of loneliness and struggling with these things because they can't even get support from their own parents. I don't understand how Facebook can know all these things and not escalate it to someone like Congress for help and support in navigating these problems.
If you were brought to this video because you feel like Eugenia Cooney is a problem, redirect your energy here. At the end, we will be talking a little bit about the KIDS Act. Some of the senators bring it up. This is real legislation that could pass and help protect children. There are, if you have the energy to tell Eugenia that she is a bad influence and she needs to age restrict and get off the platform, I hope you have the energy to do this too.
Facebook has a deep focus on scale. So scale is, can we do things very cheaply for a huge number of people, which is part of why they rely on AI so much.
This is an interesting part, talking about the algorithm and how the algorithm misses so much harmful content because it's a computer and not a person doing the checking.
I want to emphasize that TDP didn't end up running these ads, but Facebook did in fact approve them for an audience of up to 9.1 million users, all of whom were teens.
Again, all of whom
an
were
anatip.
teens.
That is a tip specifically designed to encourage and promote anorexia. And it's on there. Now, the language, the anatip itself, independently promotes that. The ad also promotes it, insofar as it was suggesting these are images you ought to look at when you need motivation to be more anorexic, I guess you could say. Obviously, I don't support, and TDP does not support these messages, but it did, in fact, receive Facebook's approval.
It is very possible that none of those ads were seen by a human.
Yeah,
And the
so she
reality
says
is that
these
seen from
ads were
repeated
probably
documents
not
within
approved by
my
a human.
disclosures is that Facebook's AI systems only catch a very tiny minority of offending content, and best case scenario in the case of something like hate speech, at most they will ever get 10 to 20%. In the case of children, that means drug paraphernalia ads like that. It's likely if they rely on computers and not humans, they will also likely never
Only
get more
10
than
to
20%
20% of harmful
The algorithms
ads.
are very smart in the sense that they latch on to things that people want to continue to engage with. And unfortunately, in the case of teen girls and things like self-harm, they develop these feedback cycles where children are using Instagram as to self-soothe, but then are exposed to more and more content that makes them hate themselves. This is a thing where we can't say 80% of kids are okay. We need to say, how do we save all the kids?
Here, Senator Blumenthal shares how his office tried an experiment where they tried to mimic an account of a teenage girl.
My office created an Instagram user identified as a 13-year-old girl. She followed a few easily identifiable accounts on weight loss, dieting, eating disorders, and she was deluged, literally, within a day.
It works that quickly.
Content pushed to her by algorithms that, in effect, promoted self-injury and eating disorders. Are you surprised by that fact?
I'm not surprised by that fact. Facebook has internal research where they have done even more gentle versions of that experiment, where they have started from things like interest in healthy recipes, so not even extreme dieting. And because of the nature of engagement-based ranking and amplification of interests, that imaginary user was pushed, or that real account was pushed towards extreme dieting and pro-anorexia content very rapidly.
And that's the algorithm.
That's the algorithm.
In the past weeks and days, parents have contacted me with their stories, heartbreaking and spine-chilling stories about children pushed into eating disorders, bullying online, self-injury of the most disturbing kind, and sometimes even taking their lives because of social media. About 15 minutes ago, a message from someone in Connecticut, and I'm going to read it to you. It's from a dad. I'm in tears right now watching your interaction with Frances Haugen. My 15-year-old daughter loved her body at 14, was on Instagram constantly, and maybe posting too much. Suddenly she started hating her body dysmorphia, now anorexia, and was in deep, deep trouble before we found treatment. I fear she'll never be the same. I'm brokenhearted.
This person's daughter, even after receiving care, this parent feels she will never be the same. And that sounds like that parent cares a lot about their child, about their daughter, and they did everything that they could. But due to the nature of how addicting these social media platforms are and how the algorithm works to target and honestly prey upon young women, girls, children, it is very disturbing. All for money, right? All for the ads. We'll get to that.
I think people tend to lose sight of the real world impact here. And I think that's the reason that you're here. I'd just like to invite you, if you have any words to those other employees at big tech, the workers who may be troubled by the misconduct or unethical conduct that they see, what you would tell them.
We live in a pattern that we have seen throughout time with regard to technologies is that humans are very crafty people. Like we find interesting solutions, but we often get out over our skis, right? We develop things that are of a larger scale than we really know how to handle. And what we have done in the past is when we see this happen, we take a step back and we find institutions and we find frameworks for doing these things in a safe way. We live in a moment where whistleblowers are very important because these technological systems are walled off. They are very complicated. They're things that you need to be a specialist to really understand the consequences of. And the fact that we've been having the exact same kinds of false choice discussions about what to do about Facebook, is it about privacy or oversight? Is it about censorship or safety? Like the fact that we're being asked these false choices is just an illustration of what happens when the real solutions are hidden inside of companies.
I like what she said about false choices. When it feels like it's a lose-lose situation, could be a hint that not all the information is there.
We need more tech employees to come forward through legitimate channels like the SEC or Congress to make sure that the public has the information they need in order to have technologies be human-centric, not computer-centric. Facebook has not earned our right to just have blind trust in them. Trust is, last week, one of the most beautiful things that I heard on the committee was trust is earned, and Facebook has not earned our trust.
Trust is earned.
So they have had the opportunity to hide their problems. And like often people do when they can hide their problems, they get in over their heads. And I think Facebook needs an opportunity to have Congress step in and say, guess what? You don't have to struggle by yourself anymore. You don't have to hide these things from us. You don't have to pretend they're not problems. You can declare moral bankruptcy, and we can figure out how to fix these things together. We have financial bankruptcy because we value people's lives more than we value money, right? The people get in over their heads, and they need a process where they admit they did something wrong, but we have a mechanism where we forgive them, and we have a way for them to move forward. Facebook is stuck in a feedback loop that they cannot get out of. They have been hiding this information because they feel trapped, right? Like they would have come forward if they had solutions to these things. They need to admit they did something wrong and that they need help to solve these problems. And that's what moral bankruptcy is.
Isn't that interesting and so universal? If you're in a situation that you feel trapped in, ask for help. Guess it goes for companies as well as the individual.
A lot of the changes that I'm talking about are not going to make Facebook an unprofitable company. It just won't be a ludicrously profitable company like it is today. Engagement-based ranking, which causes those amplification problems that leads young women from, innocuous topics like healthy recipes to anorexia content. If it were removed, People would consume less content on Facebook, but Facebook would still be profitable. And so I encourage oversight and public scrutiny into how these algorithms work and the consequences of them.
Profit over people. And that is a moral bankruptcy problem. It's a company that is trying to push and get as big and make as much revenue as possible. It's still, like she said, it's still going to be profitable.
Mark holds a very unique role in the tech industry in that he holds over 55% of all the voting shares for Facebook. There are no similarly powerful companies that are as unilaterally controlled. And in the end, the buck stops with Mark. There's no one currently holding Mark accountable but himself. I received an MBA from Harvard, and they emphasized to us that we are responsible for the organizations that we build. Mark has built an organization that is very metrics-driven. It is intended to be flat. There is no unilateral responsibility. The metrics make the decision. Unfortunately, that itself is a decision. And in the end, if he is the CEO and the chairman of Facebook, he is responsible for those decisions. Facebook needs to take responsibility for the consequences of its choices. It needs to be willing to accept small trade-offs on profit. And I think just that act of being able to admit that it's a mixed bag is important.
So this,
What we
Senator
have is a
Blumenthal and Senator
bipartisan
Markey
congressional roadmap
are
for
introducing
reform
the
that
Kids
will
Act.
safeguard and protect children from big tech. Privacy protection is long overdue. Senator Markey and I have introduced the Kids Act, which would ban addictive tactics that Facebook uses to exploit children. Parents deserve better tools to protect their children.
Here's what the legislation does. It includes outright bans on children's app features that, one, quantify popularity with likes and follower counts, promotes promotes influencer marketing, and three, that amplifies toxic posts, and that it would prohibit Facebook from using its algorithms to promote toxic posts.
Again, just something as innocent as looking at a healthy recipe. The fact that that can trigger the algorithm to start sending you Anna tips, that is something that this person, this higher up within Facebook is saying, Facebook knows about. And while they may not have a solution, they have been hiding the problem. And that is a problem. When I think about users who have been on social media platforms and are now, like for decades, such as Eugenia Cooney, and have been receiving bullying and harassment for a decade online, I cannot imagine the toll that that has taken and the lengths that you would need to go to mentally handle it and survive it. My main takeaway is that while yes, we can do things, and specifically adults can do things to try to protect themselves, certainly to try to protect their children or children in general, there are things that are out of our individual control. And there are things that this company, and specifically Mark Zuckerberg, really need to take a look at, and if they cannot make the choice themselves, that is where our government steps in and makes the choice for them, that there will be oversight, and that this really is an issue that needs to be taken seriously.